Hey Beach Bums, are you ready for the last chapter of Ribsy, chapter 7? Oh, do you think that he and Henry are going to finally be reunited? I don't know, let's see. All right, Ribsy and the apartment house. Henry pressed the telephone against his ear as hard as he could. He heard a lot of barking, and then he heard Joe yell, "What did you let him go for? There's a reward for him, $10 whole." There was an answer in a girl's voice, which Henry could not catch, the sound of thumping feet, and then nothing but the sound of a television set. "I don't get it," said Henry to his mother and father, who had been following his side of the conversation. "There was a lot of barking, and now there isn't anybody on the line." "Anybody home?" he asked into the telephone in a loud voice. There was no answer, only noise from the TV. "Hang on a minute and see what happens," said Mr. Huggins. "Now that we're this close to Ribsy, we can't let him get away." Henry strained to catch any sound that might come through the telephone. He heard barks that grew fainter, yelling, arguing, and finally a click as someone in the Sailor household replaced the telephone receiver. That means they hung up. That click was as final as a period at the end of a sentence. Slowly, he hung up his phone. He thought a minute and then said, "At least Ribsy recognized me. That's something." When Ribsy could run no more, he flopped down on the sideway in the dark to pant. As soon as he had caught his breath, he got up again, and he started off at a brisk trot with his nose to the ground. The trouble was he did not know where he was going. It was all very puzzling. He had heard Henry Huggins's voice, but he could not find Henry. He stopped and barked, thinking that Henry would call. When there was no answer, he continued his search, hoping his nose would guide him. The sidewalk gave Ribsy the scent of many people, and of a variety of dogs, and of a cat or two, but it did not give him the scent of Henry. Ribsy became tired, confused, and bewildered. Late that night, he gave up looking for Henry and went to sleep on the cold concrete in front of the Coffee Cup Cafe, where the lingering smell of hamburgers, fried during the day, gave him some comfort. Early the next morning, Ribsy woke up feeling stiff and hungry. The Coffee Cup Cafe was not open, so he walked around to the back door, where he found a garbage can that smelled interesting. It must have smelled interesting to some other dog, too. I'm sorry, I yawned once and now I can't stop. Because the can had been tipped over and the garbage was everywhere. Ribsy helped himself to some bits of bun, which were smeared with more relish than he cared for. He also ate the remains of a piece of pie. The best garbage had already been eaten, but at least his stomach was no longer completely empty. Ribsy wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood, which did not look at all like Klickitat Street, with its green lawns and white houses surrounded by shrubbery. There was very little grass in this neighborhood, and not many bushes, although there were a number of fire hydrants. Many of the buildings came right to the sidewalk, and most of them were of brick and were 3 or 4 stories high. It was in front of one of these buildings that Ribsy first saw the boy with a tennis ball. He was a thin boy, somewhat round-shouldered, who was sitting on the front steps tossing the ball from one hand to the other. Naturally, Ribsy was interested in a boy with a tennis ball. While Ribsy was watching the boy, a young woman came out of the apartment house. She was wearing a black coat over a dress and apron of a waitress. "Now see here, Larry Biggerstaff," she said, "you keep out of trouble today, you hear?" "Yeah, Mom." Larry stopped tossing the ball. Ribsy decided he did not like the smell of this woman. It reminded him of a violet bubble bath. "I don't want to hear any more complaints from the manager about you," continued his mother. "Last Saturday, Mrs. Creech complained that you played a mouth organ in the hall." A mouth organ is a harmonica. Has anyone ever played one of those? Hey, Caden? Caden. I was going to get him to go we have a harmonica. Hey, buddy, go get the harmonica. I think it's in Allie's room. Because I'm reading about a harmonica and I want my friends to see what it is. Will you go ask her? He'll be back in a minute. She complained that you were playing a mouth organ, harmonica, in the hall, bounced a ball so that it disturbed the lady downstairs, and tried to climb down the fire escape. Keep it up and you're going to get us kicked out, and then where will we go? Larry heaved a big sigh to show that he was disgusted with the whole situation. "But Mom, there's nothing to do. I don't even have a good ball to take to the playground." "I don't have money to buy balls," said his mother. "At noon you come to the cafe and get your lunch, and in the meantime, keep out of trouble." She left the apartment house and hurried down the street toward the Coffee Cup Cafe. Larry began to bounce the tennis ball, which was old and had lost much of its life. He had to throw it down hard to make it bounce at all. Hang on. Ooh, are you okay?
Yep.
Did it break?
Nope.
Okay, good. My room's kind of a disaster because I'm getting ready to paint it. So there's stuff all over the place. This is a harmonica, also known as a mouth organ, and you just blow into it. I don't really know how to play it. Maybe I should learn how to while we're home. That's what he was doing in the hall. You think that made a lot of noise? This was pretty quiet, but I wonder if I can do it even louder. Oh, it gets really loud. Okay, we won't do that anymore. But you get the idea. Are you going to go put it back where it goes? Thanks, bud. All right, let's see. Larry began to bounce the ball, which was old and had lost much of its life. I'm so sorry. You know how yawns are contagious to other people? I think they're contagious to the person who does them too, because all of a sudden I can't stop. He had to throw it down hard to make it bounce at all. Nevertheless, the sight was a stimulating one to Ribsy. That means he liked it. He pranced right up to Larry and wagged his tail to show that he was ready to play. Larry did not understand. "Go away, you old dog," he said crossly and muttered, "I don't even have a good ball." This boy needed educating. Ribsy barked to tell him that there was a dog right here ready to play with a tennis ball. Larry backed away. Ribsy wagged his tail and looked eager, but this only made Larry cautious. That means careful. Plainly, Ribsy would have to show this boy how to play. He bowed before Larry, ran off a little way, and then came dashing back. Larry dropped the ball, and then Ribsy picked it up. "You give me back my ball," said Larry. Ribsy dropped the ball and stood over it, wagging his tail. Cautiously, Larry advanced toward the ball, but just when he was about to pick it up, Ribsy grabbed it in his jaws and went racing up the street. "Hey!" yelled Larry. Ribsy raced back, dropped the ball at Larry's feet, and then stood waving his tail, looking hopefully up at the boy. "Well, thanks, pal," said Larry, surprised and pleased. "Woof!" answered Ribsy. The boy finally understood. He threw the ball down the street, and Ribsy bounded after it, darting between the people who were walking along the sidewalk and catching it on the first bounce. He was delighted, and so was Larry. The boy threw the ball again and again for Ribsy to retrieve. Finally, Larry sat down on the front steps of the apartment house, and Ribsy threw himself down at his feet to pant. "You're such a pretty nice dog," remarked Larry. "I'd like to keep you, but old Lady Creech would never let me." Ribsy laid his nose on his paws and looked up at Larry, who returned Ribsy's gaze. "You hungry?" Larry asked. Ribsy thumped his tail on the sidewalk. He liked having a boy talk to him. Larry liked having a dog to talk to. "If you were a big old dog, a big cross old dog, I bet old Lady Creech would stop yelling at me. She'd be scared to yell if I had a big ugly dog following me around." Ribsy rolled over on his back and allowed Larry to rub his stomach for him. "You wait here," said Larry. "No, that wouldn't work. You might run off while I was getting you something to eat. Can you be real quiet?" Again, Ribsy thumped his tail. "Come on, then. I'll get you some cornflakes or a hot dog or something," said Larry, and pulled a key out of his pocket. Ribsy followed him up the stairs, and Larry unlocked the front door. Inside, he tiptoed past the door of the apartment occupied by the manager of the building to an old-fashioned elevator. Ribsy was ready to enjoy this new game the boy was playing. Larry opened a glass door and folded back a metal gate, and Ribsy followed him into what appeared to be a small square room without windows. Larry closed the gate and the door and pushed a button on the wall. There was a whirring noise, and suddenly Ribsy had a feeling he had never felt before. He felt as if he was going up, while his stomach stayed down. He did not like this feeling one bit. He did not like this strange little room. He wanted out right now, so he began to bark. "Shh!" Larry seemed upset about something because he scowled and grabbed at Ribsy. "Shh! She'll hear you." The manager had already heard. A door on the first floor flew open, and a woman's mad voice called up, "Larry Biggerstaff, you get that dog out of this building at once!" It was the kind of voice that could make a dog slink away feeling guilty. By that time, the little room had stopped at the second floor. Larry slid back the gate and opened the glass door. Before he stepped out, he whispered, "You stay right here. I'll come back and get you in a minute." Then he left the frightened dog and shut him in the little room. Speaking of barking dogs. Hey, Caden. I wish I could pause this while I don't know how to pause videos. So we're just going to have to wait a second because this girl's not going to stop barking until Mr. Brandon picks her up. Come here, Pop-Up. There's Layla. She knew we were reading Ribsy. She wanted to see how it ends. Okay, let's see. Then he left the frightened dog and shut him in the little room. Ribsy did not know what to do. He did not want to stay in the little room alone, but there was no way he could get out. He was even afraid to bark, so he made anxious little whimpering noises. Suddenly he felt himself beginning to rise again while his stomach seemed to stay behind. He barked for Larry to come and get him out of this place, but all he heard was the whir of machinery and the thump of Larry's sneakers running downstairs. As the elevator stopped on the 3rd floor, his stomach caught up. Ribsy heard Larry's frightened voice coming up the elevator shaft from the 1st floor. "Dog? What dog?" he was saying. "I don't have any dog." "Don't you lie to me," the manager said. "I know there's a dog in this building." "It isn't my dog," said Larry. Upstairs, a woman opened the door and pushed back the gate. "Hello," said the woman to Ribsy, as if she met dogs in elevators every day. How did you manage to press the button?" This time Ribsy was taking no chance of being left in this frightening room that made him lose his stomach. He dashed past the woman and into the 3rd floor hall, while the door of the elevator closed behind him. Now, he did not know what to do. He was in a long hall with a strip of worn carpet down the center and doors on either side. This kind of reminds me of how Beverly Cleary, who is our author, how she described the hallway in the hotel on The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Remember how she was talking about the carpet being worn down in the middle? I wonder if that inspired her writing of Ribsy. Or the other way around. You know what? I'll have to look up. So there is a way to look this up, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be backwards to y'all, so I'm not going to show you. In the first, let's see, I'm on page 171. Okay, so in the first couple pages of a book, right before the table of contents, there is the publication page, and that kind of tells you some stuff. And it says copyright 1964. So my question and wondering is, was the Mouse and the Motorcycle written before 1964 or after? Which one did she write first? I'll look that up and let you know in the comments. Okay, let's see. At one side of the hall was a staircase, and at the end of the hall was a window with a fire escape sign over it. Nothing looked familiar to Ribsy, who had never been in an apartment place before. Larry's voice came up the stairwell. "But I don't have a dog." Ribsy did the only thing he could think of. He started down the stairs towards Larry's voice. "Young man," said Mrs. Creech, "you took a dog into that elevator. You can't fool me." Ribsy hesitated. He did not like this woman's voice. It reminded him of too many voices that had yelled, "You get off my lawn," to him. Sometimes voices like this came with a rock or a clod of dirt being thrown at him. Ribsy heard the elevator door open down on the 1st floor, and the manager say in a quite different voice, "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Berg. I was looking for a dog in the elevator." "There's no dog in the elevator," said Mrs. Berg, who was a friend of Larry's and who understood the situation. "I have come to pay my rent." "Certainly," said the manager. "Just step into my apartment while I write your receipt." Ribsy stood listening at the steps, but all he heard was the elevator door close and the machinery whir. As the elevator rose, Ribsy started cautiously down the steps. He did not know what to expect in this strange building where rooms went up in the air. The 2nd floor looked exactly like the 3rd, which Ribsy had just left. The same strip of carpet, the same doors on either side, the same window with a sign over it at the end of the hall. Ribsy felt confused. He was even more confused when he heard a whispered psst. It was Larry, who was supposed to be down below and but was now up above. While Ribsy had walked down to the 2nd floor, Larry had ridden up to the 3rd. "Woof," answered Ribsy, who wanted to get out of this place. "Shh!" Larry's worried face appeared in the stairwell above Ribsy. He came tiptoeing down the steps. "I've got to get you out of here," he whispered. "Come on." He started to lead Ribsy on down the steps when the door of the manager's apartment opened on the 1st floor. "Thank you, Mrs. Berg," the manager was saying. "We can't go down that way," whispered Larry. "Come on, this way." Ribsy obeyed because he did not know where to go by himself, and because he wanted to stay away from the woman with the angry voice. Larry led him down the hall toward the back stairs, which were near the window with the sign over it. He was about to start down with Ribsy when he heard someone coming up. "I don't know who it is, but I'm not taking any chances," Larry muttered, looking around wildly. He saw the window at the end of the hall and opened it. Ribsy found himself being picked up, thrust through the window, and dropped onto the fire escape. The window was closed behind him, and a curtain pulled. Ribsy's feet slid through the metal bars of the fire escape and stuck down in the empty space. If an elevator was a strange place, a fire escape was much, much worse. Ribsy felt as if he should be falling, but instead, there he hung in midair. Inside, he heard the manager's angry voice, which made him feel as if he had done something he should not, but he could not understand what it was. Silently, he struggled to get all 4 of his feet up onto the metal bars of the fire escape. Ribsy soon discovered that a fire escape was not only frightening, it was uncomfortable. He had to move his feet carefully on the cold metal or they would slip through. It made him uneasy to see the ground so far below him. There was an opening in the fire escape big enough to jump through, but the ground was too far down. Since Ribsy could not go down, he did the next best thing. He went up. Because he was an optimistic dog, he hoped things might be better up there. He climbed up cautiously, 1 step on the steep, slanting ladder at a time. Unfortunately, when he reached the next level of the fire escape, things were worse. The good solid ground was farther away. Ribsy peered into the window, but the 3rd-floor hall was empty. With his tail drooping, Ribsy looked around. The view was better, but there was nothing a dog would be glad to see, only some old fenders and wrecked cars behind the body and fender shop below. He could look out over the roof of the shop and see the cars and buses on the busy street on the other side of the block. He tried whimpering out the window, but no one came. He gave an experimental bark, but there was so much banging in the body and fender shop that no one heard him. Bewildered and frightened, Ribsy lay down on the fire escape as best he could. The cold metal bars pressed into his body, and the breezes blew under as well as over him. Nothing was comfortable, nothing was familiar. He felt more lost than he had ever felt before. There was nothing to do but lie there on the fire escape, watching the traffic and listening to the banging in the body and fender shop and wait for things to get better. A half-hour went by and then a full hour. Larry did not come back, and the building was silent because the apartments overlooking the body and fender shop were rented to people who were out all day and did not have to listen to the noise. Ribsy grew cold and stiff. His body hurt from the iron bars that pressed into him. Things were not getting any better. Ribsy would have to do something. Ribsy got up and managed to shake himself without having his feet slip through the fire escape. Cautiously, he put one paw and then the other on the window ledge once more and whimpered at the empty hall. The doors remained closed. No rescuer appeared. Ribsy became impatient. He barked. Still no one came to rescue him. No one cared about the dog on the fire escape. He was forgotten. Ribsy turned around carefully and barked through the railing toward the traffic on the next street. The only answer he got was the banging in the body and fender shop below. Ribsy walked gingerly around the fire escape to make sure he had not missed a way out. There were only the ladder steps, and while he had not minded climbing up, they were much too steep to go down. It is harder to go. Like going down a ladder is a lot harder to go than go up. Ribsy became frantic. That means really nervous. He felt as if the whole world had gone off and left him. He barked and barked and barked. There must be somebody, someplace, who would come and get him off this thing. And there was somebody. Somebody way down below on the next street. Who do you think it is? Ribsy! It was Henry Huggins' voice coming from the new station wagon, which was moving along with the rest of the traffic on the street. Ribsy! Henry had his head out of the window and was pointing up at the fire escape. At the sound of the voice he loved, Ribsy went wild. He barked until he was hoarse. In his excitement, his back feet slipped through the fire escape. Terrified that he might fall through, he scrambled frantically to get his footing on the metal bars. When his feet were planted safely once more, there was no sign of Henry anyplace. This terrified Ribsy even more. Henry had gone off and left him again. He barked so hoarsely and so wildly that even the body and fender men heard him. One of them came to the back door of the shop and looked up at the dog on the fire escape. "Well, I'll be doggoned," he said, pushing his greasy cap back on his head. "How did you get up there?" Ribsy whimpered anxiously. He felt better just having someone speak to him. "Hey, Bert," the body and fender man called to someone in his shop. Do you know what a body and fender shop is? It's just a car shop. It's a place where they work on cars. There's a dog on the fire escape. No kidding? Bert appeared and looked up at Ribsy. Well, what do you know? How do you suppose he got up there? Ribsy tried to tell the man that he had to get down and that he had to run down the street and find Henry Huggins before he got so far away he could never find him again. What do you think we should do? Asked the body and fender man. Bert shrugged. Probably some kid put him there. Most likely it was Larry. He'll probably get him down again. Yeah, I guess you're right. The two men knew Larry, who often came into the shop to admire the wrecked cars. Suddenly, Ribsy saw Henry Huggins appear from around the side of the building. Ribsy! The boy shouted. I found you! So exciting. I'm so excited I can't even turn the page. This time, Ribsy barked for joy at the sight of the boy down below. Funny place to lose a dog, said the body and fender man. I didn't lose him there, explained Henry, his eyes on the dog. I lost him a whole month ago at the shopping center. Then what's he doing up there? The man asked. Search me, said Henry. All that really mattered was that he had found his dog at last. All I know is I was talking to him on the telephone, and he started running, and nobody saw him after that. The two men looked at one another, shook their heads, and turned to go back into the shop. One of them said something that sounded like, poor kid, too much TV. I think he's making it up. The other said, yeah, my boy watches those talking animal programs too, but he's too smart to believe them. Next, Ribsy saw Henry's mother and father come around the corner of the apartment house. I finally found a parking space, remarked Mr. Huggins, and then looked up at Ribsy. Hello there, fellow. Ribsy made eager, anxious noises. Surely his family would not go off and leave him here. See, Dad, said Henry, I told you if we just drove around in this neighborhood, we were sure to find him. I told you he couldn't be too far from that Joe's house. You were right, Henry, said his mother, and now we don't have to argue with that boy Joe about who owns him. How on earth do you suppose he got up there? Ribsy whimpered again to remind Henry he would like to get off this thing. What worries me is how we're going to get him down, said Henry. By this time, Larry Biggerstaff arrived. He had been sitting on the front steps, worrying about how he was going to get rid of the dog, when he had noticed 3 people hurry down the side of his apartment building and overheard the words dog and fire escape. That's easy, Mr. Huggins was saying. I'll just go ring the bell and tell the manager we want our dog back. Please don't do that, begged Larry, bursting into the conversation. The dog isn't supposed to be there, and I'll catch it if the manager finds out about him. She might even kick me and my mom out like she always says she's going to. Ribsy barked to remind the people below that he was still up here. Shh, hissed Larry. I don't get it, said Henry. What's he doing up there? Well, I was playing out in front with this old tennis ball I have. From the way Larry spoke of the tennis ball, it was easy to tell he did not think very much of it. This dog came along and wanted to chase it, and well, I got to thinking he might be hungry, and so I started to take him inside, and the manager started chasing me, and I shoved him out on the fire escape to hide him. And well, I've been sitting out on the front steps trying to figure out how I was going to get rid of him without the manager seeing me. I see, said Mr. Huggins. Well, you just get him down, said Henry. Fast. Now, Henry, said his mother. I didn't put him out on the 3rd floor, said Larry. I put him out on the 2nd, and he climbed up to the 3rd. Ribsy was so eager to get down, he put a paw on the ladder steps. He could not do it. They were too steep. He was afraid. We seem to have a problem, said Mr. Huggins, looking up at the dog. Maybe you could boost me up to that little ladder that sticks down from the bottom part, and I could climb up and carry him down, offered Larry, who was glad someone had arrived to help him with this problem. Oh, no, said Mrs. Huggins hastily. We couldn't let you climb down those steep steps with a dog. You might slip. Ribsy could not be patient any longer. He put his paw on the top step again. Maybe we could call the fire department and they could bring a net and he could jump, suggested Henry. Don't do that. Please don't do that, Larry objected. The manager really gets excited when she sees a fire engine in front of the building. Ribsy was beginning to think the people below had forgotten all about him. He put a second paw on the steps. He wanted so much to get down. He wanted to feel Henry petting him again and to lick his face. Even though he was afraid, he was going to try. This is ridiculous, said Mr. Huggins. I'll just go in the back door and up the back stairs and bring him in through the window. And have someone mistake you for a burglar? Asked Mrs. Huggins. Oh, no. You go, Henry said to Larry. You got him up there. Larry looked frightened. The manager might catch me. "Then I'll go," said Henry. Ribsy reached for the second step, and at the same time he brought his hind feet down to the top step. "No, you won't," said Henry's mother. You can't just go roaming around in a strange building." "We can't just leave him," Henry began. Ribsy had started down the steep steps. It was too late to turn back even if he wanted to, and he did not want to. He found himself coming down the steps faster than he expected. The metal was slippery to his paws. Halfway down, he slipped and tumbled, yelping, to the bottom, and there he was with his feet dangling in space again. "Hey, look," Henry pointed. Everyone was looking at Ribsy. "He got down by himself. That proves he wants to come home to us." Ribsy picked himself up and scrambled around trying to find places to set his feet. "Did you hurt yourself, Ribsy?" Henry asked. Ribsy managed to set his feet on the slats of the fire escape. "Woof," he said, and wagged his tail to show that he was still all right. "Smart dog, Ribsy," said Henry. "Now, how do we get him down from there?" The two men from the body and fender shop came out once more to see what all the commotion was about. "I hear that dog talks on the telephone," remarked Bert. "He did once," said Mr. Huggins absent-mindedly. He was wondering how they were going to get Ribsy down to the ground. The two men exchanged a glance. "There's a ladder in the shop that would reach almost to the bottom of the fire escape," one of them said. "I'll get it." He returned in a moment with a paint-splattered step ladder, which he set up under the fire escape. It almost reached the metal ladder that extended down from the fire escape. "I'll go, Dad," said Henry, eager to get his hands on his dog again. "You'd better let me go," said his father, mounting the step ladder. With help so near, Ribsy barked joyfully. "Shh!" hissed Larry. Mr. Huggins climbed the stepladder and then the short ladder that was part of the fire escape. He crawled through the opening in the lower level of the fire escape and picked up Ribsy. "Hold still, boy," he said as Ribsy gratefully tried to lick his face. "You'll fall," worried Mrs. Huggins. "You can't possibly climb down the fire escape ladder and the stepladder with a dog." "Don't drop him," begged Henry. "I'm afraid that's what I will have to do," said Mr. Huggins. "Go ahead," said one of the body and fender men. "We'll catch him." Ribsy felt himself being lifted over the railing of the fire escape, and then he experienced a terrible moment of panic as he fell through the air. Suddenly, everything was all right. 4 strong hands caught him. Ribsy wiggled out of the grasp of the men and sprang into Henry's arms where he licked Henry's face for joy. "Ribsy," said Henry, "Ribsy, old boy." He put the dog down at last, and Ribsy was so happy he waggled all over. Henry sank to his knees and hugged his dog. "Whew, that's a relief," said Larry. Mr. Huggins reached into his pocket and brought out his wallet. "I think part of the reward money should be yours," he said to Larry. "What for?" Larry looked suspiciously at Henry's father, as if he thought he might be joking. "I didn't do nothing." "You put him up there where we could see him," said Mr. Huggins, and held out 3 $1 bills. "If you hadn't put him up on the fire escape, we could have driven around all day without seeing him." Larry looked doubtfully at the bills, like he didn't really believe it. "Sure," said Henry. "You put him up there in plain sight." Henry took the 3 bills. "Thanks. I can buy a good ball with this." He grinned at Mr. Huggins and then at Henry. Then he patted Ribsy. Ribsy was so happy that he wriggled all over for Larry, too. "And now I think we'd better go home before Larry's manager catches us," said Mr. Huggins, as the men took down the ladder and carried it back into the shop. "I wonder if the dog knows how to dial the telephone, too," remarked Bert. "If he does, he ought to be on TV," answered the other men. So they think that they meant that Ribsy was actually, like, talking on the phone, like, hello, talking. They did not understand that he was barking. Henry and his parents and Larry walked along the side of the apartment house, with Ribsy bounding right along beside them. In front of the building, they ran right into Mrs. Creech, who was sweeping the front steps. "I knew you had a dog, Larry Biggerstaff," she said. "Wait till I talk to your mother about this." "Oh, there must be some mistake," said Mr. Huggins politely. "This is our dog. He never belonged to Larry." "But," began Mrs. Creech. "No," said Mr. Huggins firmly. "The dog is ours and has been for several years. We just misplaced him for a while." Mrs. Creech did not know what to say about that, so she went back to sweeping the steps. Henry opened the door of the station wagon, which still smelled like a new car. "Hop in," he said to Ribsy. Ribsy accepted the invitation. He jumped in and settled himself on the seat. This time he knew he was welcome. Henry climbed in beside him. He picked up the leather collar, which was lying on the seat, and fastened it around Ribsy's neck. Ribsy thumped his tail on the seat. Mrs. Huggins smiled at Ribsy and did not say a word. Ribsy could ride in the new station wagon all he wanted. And that's the end. Did you like how it ended? It was an exciting end, like lots of danger and mystery. I wonder if Layla liked it. Layla, did you like it? If you got reunited with me, would you lick my face all over? Or are you too sleepy? She thinks it's nap time. Oh my gosh, she might fall asleep just like this. Have a